All right, it's in between. Sean says he has something.
All right, let's get into it. What do you think about Dan DiDio being gone from DC Comics? And first of all, do you know what we're talking about?
I know that name. Who is he?
He was the president, publisher? Editor.
Of which comics?
DC Comics.
DC Comics.
Oh, I did read about that.
He also would do some writing every now and then.
Every now and then.
Somebody you like?
Well,
Can you not comment?
Did you see my eyes get big and small at the
well,
exact
it's
same
not
time?
only that. What you can't see through the medium of audio only was that his eyes got bigger, his smile got wider, and he also kind of leaned in toward me, and I was like, "Oh shit!"
If you think about like all the big things that have happened in DC, both good and bad, are kind of attributed to him. Forever Evil, Infinite Crisis, the New 52, all that kind of stuff.
All right, so probably about 2 decades ago, DC hired a editor named Dan DiDio, who kind of became the editor-in-chief over everybody. And we've had 2 decades of Dan being in charge of DC publishing wing and all of the creative. In that period of time, we saw the rise of Jeff Johns in terms of writing. I mean, Johns was writing a little bit earlier than that, but he kind of came to prominence and kind of became the creative overseer.
Joe Quesada would be the Marvel version.
Dan DiDio was the first person to do creator-exclusive agreements, including locking in Grant Morrison to a creative agreement, Gail Simone. All of their top talent at some point had an exclusive agreement. Now, over the time, Marvel kind of figured that out and started doing their own.
They started competing with
They started competing for talent. That's why you know that one writer was at one group and the other. And most recently, Dan DiDio was shepherded Brian Michael Bendis, a long-time Marvel writer, over into DC. And Brian is now writing Superman and Action Comics and kind of also leading a little bit more.
Yeah, like if you like Miles Morales and stuff, that's Brian Bendis.
So Friday of this last week, and you can kind of date, our show based upon this. AT&T, who bought Warner Brothers,
Okay.
right? Dan DiDio was brought into the office and fired.
That day.
They fired him?
That day.
2 decades. Bye.
Wow.
Escorted out of the office, from what I hear.
Yes.
So did they get a report in right away that he's been fucking up the property and they
that's
need
the
to
thing.
fix it? Or
Now, Dan, I will...
Do you think any of it has to do with 5G?
I feel like, and this is not an excuse for Dan DiDio, I feel like anybody who has risen to a place of prominence of power will have half of the people that hate him and half of the people that like him.
Right.
I feel like that person who's risen to power, there are some good things that she has done and some bad things that she has done to get there. Like, there are a lot of things. If you want to hate on Dan DiDio, you can find a lot of things to hate on Dan DiDio. If you want to like Dan DiDio, you can find a lot of things that make you like Dan DiDio in terms of what he's done over the last 2 decades.
Okay.
DC is about to unveil a new initiative called, they were calling it 5G until the media companies come in and said, hey, that's 5G is related to phones. And
also you hear the whole generation.
They renamed it Generation 5.
But Generation Zero that they're starting off with is a Valiant comic title, so there's going to be a fight over that name too.
So they're renaming their new initiative called Generation 5. Now, when you look at DC Comics over the years, we have the Silver Age. The 50s came along, and we have the Golden Age.
Gold, silver, bronze.
And then the 50s came along, and DC relaunched some of their classic characters, like Flash was now Barry Allen, Green Lantern was now Hal Jordan, and they called that the Silver Age. Then we move into the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s. You have Giant-Size X-Men, where Chris Claremont kind of brought his Cyclops his Wolverine, Colossus, and Storm,
Banshee and all that.
right, became more of a diverse team. And we have the DC leading with the new Teen Titans, which was based upon the Silver Age Teen Titans, and that became the Bronze Age. You move a little further to the middle of the 80s, and you suddenly have like the Crisis on Infinite Earth, where DC's trying to reconcile their universe, their years of continuity with the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age. You move into the 90s, you kind of get the Image era and the Valiant era, right, when they kind of the creative teams left and moved out, became independent comics, became relevant. And you have the Dark Knight Returns towards the beginning of that era. And then you move into 2000s, which was Dan DiDio. And Dan DiDio decided to do exclusive contracts, signing creators to years of service to kind of create their universe and give it more of a focus. Over the course of his tenure, Dan DiDio saw the familiar Crisis on Infinite Earths coming back in terms of Final Crisis, Identity Crisis, Infinite Crisis, and that stuff. He also kind of heralded the relaunch of the DC Universe into the New 52. That was his launch. And then a few years later, when that kind of became a sales bust, he launched the Rebirth.
Oh man, remember they had actually 52 titles out there, and how
All
many
of them got
just
canceled, but like 6 of them.
Yeah.
So then you move into the Rebirth era when they brought Wally West back from the 90s, and DC kind of restarted the Rebirth, which was the start of Tom King's Batman. It was bringing back the 1990s Superman. So the New 52 Superman basically died. And the 1990s Superman, who was married to Lois, came back, and they had a kid. That was a part of the Rebirth.
I remember that.
So DC's about to launch a new thing called Generation 5.
Okay.
And I'm going to be honest, I know some things based upon talking to people, so I have to be a little careful in terms of what's already out there and what's not out there. So I'm going to let Sean lead with what he thinks is out there if we're going to talk about it. But I will say this. If you'd been with DC Comics for 2 decades and you saw Final Crisis, Infinite Crisis, New 52, and Rebirth, and you saw really, really, really high peaks of sales based upon those gigantic events, but you couldn't sustain those sales longer than 6 months to a year, and you're about to launch a brand new initiative called Generation 5, would you want that person involved with that launch?
Probably not.
2 decades.
That makes sense.
2 decades of history.
We're talking bottom lines, and that's especially when there is a merger. A company's immediately going to look and say, "What are our divisions? We got to get rid of this person. Move it."
This is me as a retailer looking at this.
Yeah.
Dan has had successful launches. He knows how to get talent. He knows how to get attention.
Right.
But when I look at his 20 years of history, that he can't sustain it.
Yeah.
So you're now about to launch a new initiative, and he's involved with it. And you have a moment before this comes out, before you get entrenched in that launch.
Right.
I look at Generation 5 and I think, I know Dan is a great guy and I know he can do some great stuff.
It's just not going to work.
It's not going to work
How
over
old
time.
He's gotta
Probably
be
50.
late
Okay.
50s.
Yeah.
I was just curious because he'll probably land somewhere else.
Oh, he'll be fine. He's a dynamic person. He knows how to do what he does very, very well.
Right.
However, you now have an opportunity after 2 decades to change some leadership and bring something in there.
Yeah.
I would do it. And AT&T is the new overlords over Warner Brothers. And I would look at this and go, okay, we've got this idea we're excited about. And we're excited about it both with the movie studios and both the publishing. We know exactly what DC is going to do. We're look this. Dan is not the guy to lead it.
Right.
And it's not that he is a bad person or a bad guy and has not had successful launches, but me as a retailer, I know that it can't be sustained without different
And again,
guidance.
in the corporate structure, it's not about whether he's a good or bad guy. It's bottom line. Hey, we've done that. You've shown that you did this and it fell. Did this and it fell. We want to do this and grow.
Now his detractors will bring in every single thing that he's done over the last 2 decades to say why he's a villain and why he should be let go. There are issues of him potentially protecting editors that may have had sexual harassment claims against him. There's issues with possible harassment happening in the office under his watch. There's issues of people being fired when they shouldn't necessarily be fired. There are issues of editors suddenly leaving because they're all mad. I mean, there's all these little small things as a manager and micromanager that you're going to get pinged for with 2 decades of history. Whether they were relevant to this case, who knows? There was no straw. There was no
There was no line in the sand. Yeah.
When I look at it from the exterior, watching what's going on, there was nothing that sank him outside of just recognizing we need a new direction.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that comic companies are not affected by movies as far as sales go. It doesn't really move the needles. A Spider-Man movie doesn't mean a spike in Spider-Man sales. A Superman movie doesn't mean a spike in Superman sales. So companies don't necessarily look at they look at the comic division kind of as a loss leader / idea generator. So we can pay X writer to create a character that we will now own because he works for our company, and then we can farm that out to movies, to TV, to merchandising.
We touched on this,
and that's why I don't think the 5G will work, because we're trying to merchandise.
What do you think 5G is?
5G is, from what I understand, is they're going to make legacy characters go away and new people take over their titles.
Okay.
It's going to be
that isn't wholly true, but go ahead.
A new Superman, a new Batman.
It isn't wholly true, but go ahead.
a new Green Lantern, but the old people will still be there, like being mentored and stuff. The problem with that is somebody goes into the movie theater, they watch Bruce Wayne be Batman, and if you come into a store and say, "Hey, well, I want to get Bruce Wayne Batman," and they're serving you up somebody else, why the hell do I want this?
There was a really, really, this is maybe a private conversation that I actually had with Dan DiDio once, and we talked about writers and growth. I have faith in my writers. I would like to follow their characters over time and see where they go. I do follow characters, but I actually prefer to follow writers over characters.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way.
So Dan told me this story once, and he talked about this circle. He put a glass down, and he said, "Here's Superman, and I have a writer." Because of what the audience expects, that writer can write within that circle. But that writer cannot go outside of that circle because that character is now no longer recognizable by the audience itself.
I can see that. It's
okay?
That
is why Barbara Gordon came back as Batgirl, even though we spent 15 years with her as Oracle. And the audience loved her as Oracle. And New 52 happened. We had a chance to relaunch it. What happened? Barbara Gordon is back as Batgirl again. Killing Joke never happened. She was never Oracle. She never had that ability to do that kind of stuff. And the audience was in horror over what they did for putting Oracle back into the proverbial closet, if you will, in terms of her character growth for the last 15 years. So, yes, I understand. Everybody wants Bruce Wayne as Batman, and everybody wants Clark Kent as Superman. But these characters still need to grow and change over time. And if 5G allows that to happen without changing the core of who the characters are or their identities, would you be okay with it?
I don't have a problem with change. A lot of people, when they go to read a story, they say, "Give me something new, but it has to be exactly what I've already read before."
Right. And that is the challenge you've had almost, 3 generations of people who've gone through these stories reading. How do you find new ways to tell the same story again and again?
What you do is you don't tell stories with those. You create new things like, just throwing out Walking Dead or Saga or Invincible, where you can take chances with characters. Characters can grow because you're not beholden to a 50 years of continuity.
But I wish that DC...
There's a level to which characters are evergreen, and you can kind of continue to tell the same stories over again. Like Marvel does this thing where the Avengers are always... Captain America is always discovered in the ice in the 70s, and then the 80s, and then the 90s. And Avengers become more relevant because they've kept this Captain America point of shifting every single decade when he's rediscovered in the ice and when the Avengers become
to your point and what Dan DiDio was saying, if you change a character too much, then it's not that character. Spider-Man should always be down on his luck, trying to make money, have a sick aunt, not liked by people.
That's why Spider-Man Worldwide didn't work.
And when Spider-Man becomes a famous rich person, then that's not Spider-Man.
Right. But Marvel has had a couple of successful launches over the last decade. A next generation of characters, if you will. And that's like Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, who've taken on the monikers of previous characters.
But they're not trying to be those characters. That's the difference.
Correct. So if DC could do the same type of thing and you have your top writers on it, it would do well. Now, let me go back to New 52 just for a second. I'm going to sound smarter than I actually am. They did a roadshow, and Dan DiDio was a part of it, and Jim Lee was a part of it, and I was there for one of those roadshow meetings. And they were pitching the New 52 to retailers, and all the retailers were balking, right? You can't change Superman. You can't change Wonder Woman. You can't change this. And like, it's a new universe. It's this and this. So they start going down the list of books. They talk about what were some of the launch books? Batman, Soldier, Superman, Action,
Lobo,
Frankenstein, and what was the Frankenstein one?
The Seven Soldiers,
Frankenstein, the Seven Soldiers, that kind of stuff. And they go down this. Blue Beetle is one of them. They go down this entire list. And what I'm doing the entire time that they're
checking off the ones that aren't going to last.
I wrote a list, and I wrote down every title. I'd love to go back and find my notes. I wrote down every title, and I wrote down every creative team, writer and artist. And we got to the end of the pitch, and I raised my hand, and I said, I can tell you right now which books are going to fail. And now I can tell you right now which books are going to fail because those writers do not have the sales history to sustain